We have tried to do, I might mention, a good cost-benefit analysis in California, looking at this entire industry of ports and rail yards and goods movement, and we've asked the government to do that type of cost-benefit analysis. We've not been successful in having it done. There is an economist named John Haveman, Haveman, at a group called Beacon Economics, and he has looked at some of the loss of economic opportunities that occur in communities that have rail and intermodal facilities. So we can possibly get that to Eric or some of the organizers. So now I'd like to look at some of the traffic impacts and compare the emissions at some of the California rail yards with what is being proposed for Gardner. In Southern California, we do have a number of situations where we have rail immediately in close proximity to homes. So we're concerned about pollution, we're concerned about traffic. We haven't even had time to mention noise this evening, but that's certainly a concern. And we are also concerned about pollution, traffic, noise, and land use. And again, I mentioned that this land in Riverside County, California, used to be all dairy or agricultural land, equestrian land, horse country, and this is what it looks like now with pictures that we've taken from an airplane. So what I'd like to do is to compare some of the rail yard emissions in California. So we're looking at how many tons of, in this case in particular, particulate particles, how many tons of particulate matter are being released from the rail yards. And we're comparing the intermodal facility proposal with estimates at certain intermodal rail yards in California. So this is much too tiny to read, but this is just to show you that California has done studies of 18 different rail yards. And some of these rail yards are what you call classification yards that are moving the trains around. Others are the intermodal facilities. So my comparisons are really of the intermodal facilities. But from this, I think you can see that California has really done a lot of effort to study the rail yards and to figure out what kinds of emissions are coming out of which types of equipment. In fact, they find that locomotives and heavy-duty diesel trucks are the largest contributors to diesel particulate matter from the rail yards. And then there's cargo handling equipment, the truck refrigeration units, and a variety of other kinds of yard equipment. So this is what the mix of pollution is. Angelo already showed you that in those studies, they've also looked at the cancer risk. So they know that people who live closest to the rail yard have the highest cancer risks. And these circles are called isopleths. And the further you get away from the rail yard, the lower your risk is. But in Commerce, they found that even a mile away from the fence line of the rail yard, the diesel cancer risk was still at 100 in a million. And that means that if you were exposed, if you lived there for your whole life and were breathing that diesel exhaust your whole life, that 100 people out of a million people living there would be more likely to get cancer. And so these are some of the cancer risks from the rail yards in California. You see that the top rail yard, BNSF Railway in San Bernardino, is listed at a 2,500 in a million cancer risk. And then it goes on down with the second one down are the 4 rail yards in Angelo's community of commerce, which is around 1,000 in a million. And I think it's important for you to understand what the railroads are doing in California. There's been so much outcry about the pollution that the state and to some extent, the local government has really tried to make the railroads clean up some of the pollution. So this is a list of what they are doing in California to reduce emissions. They're turning over the truck fleet, using low sulfur fuel. There's an agreement with the state of California. They're turning over their switch engines. They have anti-idling devices. Some of these are suggestions that BNSF has said they will do in their new proposal, but certainly not all of these. So here is the Gardner IMF environmental assessment. And it's kind of, for me, it was kind of buried. There's something called Appendix A in the environmental assessment, and inside Appendix A, there's an Appendix B. This table is from Appendix B, and I've tried to point the arrows to show you what the particulate matter emissions are in tons. So if you remember, we look back here to see this long list, and on the far right column are the emissions in tons for the rail yards in California. 27, 22, there's some tiny yard in San Diego, 1.7, 23.7, 16.5, 11, 10, 25, 23. So we go to the Gardner yard, and in that list, you can see the very bottom of that point with the arrow, the total number of tons of particulate emission is 5.68. So to me, those numbers just don't add up. So I put them all together on one chart. I took that Appendix A, Appendix B table and put it into the California table. And you can see that the third column down shows how many lifts there are at each of these facilities. So it's basically how big it is, how many containers are being lifted off a truck onto a train or off a train onto a truck. And these are all different size facilities. But if you look at the Burlington Northern San Bernardino yard, which has 557,000 lifts, and you compare it to the BNSF in yellow, the BNSF Gardner yard, which has 413,000, those aren't dramatically different, but if we go all the way over to the right-hand side, the Burlington Northern Rail Yard has 22 tons of emissions, and the Gardner Yard is going to have 5.7. So I have trouble having these numbers add up because, seriously, I've spent a lot of time, I'm out there in California working on this, looking at these Kansas numbers, and I can't figure out what they mean. Because we've worked so hard in California to reduce the emissions that you would think that we would have dramatically lower emissions in California than you have here. And yet the proposal is suggesting that with fewer mitigation measures, this yard in Gardner is going to have much lower emissions. So I know that they don't seem to be looking at the trucks when they get out of the rail yard facility. They're just looking at the trucks inside the rail yard. In California, they looked at trucks at least a mile from the rail yard because obviously in that first mile from the rail yard, you're getting a huge number of trucks traveling on the same highway. So this is something that I think is really important for the Army Corps of Engineers to redo. This was, I got rid of a couple of my slides. Oh dear, I'm sorry. 1 second, let me go back. How did that happen? Let me see. Oh, I didn't. So I think we need to, there's a company called Environ, and Environ did the emissions inventory. And emissions inventory means you count how many locomotives, you count the notches, you count if they're idling, you count how old they are, and you figure out what kind of emissions are coming out. So the same company did the analysis in California as for BNSF here. So why is it so different? I think we need to know more details and how this could be possible. And then we should be looking at what BNSF is promising for. They want to build a new cleanest rail yard in the United States in Southern California, a new rail yard. And so they're promising that they'll put in all electric cranes, and BNSF has said they'll put in mostly electric cranes here, but some other kinds of gantry cranes. LNG fueled hostling equipment, that means the yard equipment will not be diesel. 100% of the truck fleet servicing the new rail yard in California will be 2000 model trucks or newer, and low emission switch engines. So that's what they are promising for California. Now we do have worse air than you do, but so we really need those kind of mitigation measures. But these are some of the things that I think the Army Corps of Engineers should be looking at, and all of you might be looking at. And then I don't know if there's anyone here from the Kansas Department of Health and the Environment, but they submitted a long list of what should be done in their comments last time, all the suggestions that they had, and I think a lot of these suggestions have not been taken into account. So based on our experience in California with rail yard emissions, I would urge, besides the recommendations I had earlier, that a more comprehensive environmental review be conducted with an environmental impact statement, and that the Army Corps and Environ recheck, and BNSF recheck all of their emission inventory methodologies and create inventories that can actually be compared to California's. And of course, that there be a public hearing so that all of you can ask questions and make comments. I'm just going to really quickly whip through this freight traffic because I think that I'm probably out of